Hello again, everyone. This is Leslie Pelch at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and I think we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar today, which is QGIS, Understanding and Using Attribute Data, Queries, and Analysis. I'm going to actually skip the intro that I usually do where I describe how to use the GoToWebinar interface, the little panel over on your right. So please let me know if you have any questions about it. You'll notice over in your panel that there is a little section called Questions. Any of the sections in your panel that you want to figure out what's in there, you just click on the little plus sign right next to it, and you'll see in the questions section that you can type in a question that comes to me. So I'll kind of keep an eye out for those to see if any questions come through. I might save most of the questions related to the webinar until the end if I can, but if there are things that need to be addressed in the midst, I will do that. And I'll warn you that I'm coming off of a cough, so I'm going to try not to cough into everyone's ears, but I might mute myself every so often to either cough or take a sip of water, so apologize for that. So I'm actually starting out here at VCGI's website just so I can quickly show you that this webinar is being recorded, unlike last week's, which had some technical difficulties. So we are recording today, and it will be posted at our YouTube page. So I'm just showing you how to easily get to our YouTube page. At our front page of our website, vcgi.vermont.gov, if you look over on your left, underneath the contact information, you'll see a little row of social media links, and one of them is to our YouTube page. And this is our YouTube page. And you'll see there's lots of previous webinars posted here, which you can check out if you'd like to. And this one will get posted there within probably by tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then Monday, because I will be out on Friday. And the one other thing I want to show you at our website is that if you, for some reason, don't remember how to get to that page, you can always go to the event archive. So if you click on events, you'll see event archive. Click on that, and you'll see a link to webinars. So that's where I put links to things. As you can see, last week's webinar was not recorded, but I do have the PowerPoint posted, and then last year some of the webinars that we did are linked here as well. And then the final thing, just need to move my GoToWebinar thing, is that the materials that I use in the training that I do in the summer, which is indeed a QGIS training. You can see this is referring to the last summer. This page actually has the materials that are used during that training, which is pretty much what I'm going to use to take us through this webinar. So today's webinar is Understanding and Using Attribute Data, Queries, and Analysis, Chapter 8 of this manual. So if you're interested in getting that document, you just go right to the Education and Training section of our website, VCGI Training Opportunities, and at the bottom of that page you'll see those listed. Okay, so I am now going to open up QGIS. So if, just in case anyone's not familiar with it, which I assume you all are at least a little bit, QGIS is a free open source software program that I have downloaded onto my computer, and I don't actually have the most recent version because I recently downloaded the most recent version and it was a little bit buggy and was causing me problems, so I actually went back one version just because I think it was brand new. So I've got version 2.8.3, free open source, somewhat equivalent to ArcMap or ArcView, if any of you ever used it, ArcMap, the basic version of ArcGIS, very similar functionality, not quite up there in terms of all the bells and whistles, but I find it to be very powerful, and more and more people are using it around the world. So we're going to start out today with a blank slate, and whenever I start out with a blank project, a brand new project, I always set my project properties so that I have enabled on-the-fly CRS transformation, and I'm setting my coordinate system because I'm in Vermont and I work primarily with data that is in Vermont State Plane meters coordinate system. That's what I'm going to set things to. And that way any data that I bring in that isn't Vermont State Plane will actually be transformed into it so that everything lines up. So I'm just going to start out by adding a couple of data layers. First, so this is the data that we use in our training. First, I'm just going to add the town boundaries. And for anybody that's new to QGIS or new to GIS, I'll apologize that I am going to go relatively quickly through all these clicks and steps because our focus is not on the basics of using QGIS, but specifically on working with the attribute data and doing a little bit of analysis. So if anybody finds that I'm going too fast, go back and look at some of the other webinars that take you a little bit more slowly through the intro. So here's the Vermont town boundaries. And I am also going to add in one other data layer. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and add that. And that was where we started here, actually. I'm going to add some parcel data. And parcel data, if anyone's not familiar with that, is just tax map data, parcel ownership boundary data. And in particular, this is some data that that allows us to link what in Vermont is called grand list data or the assessment data with the boundary data, which is not inherently linked here in Vermont by towns, but this data has the ability to be linked. So I went ahead and linked it so that we can see a little bit of the functionality you gain with that. I'm going to quickly change our symbology just so it's not such an annoying color. Maybe we'll just make it blank. So the first basic thing is just to open up the attribute table for the town boundary layer. So hopefully most of you are familiar with the concept that GIS data consists of both the geographic component that shows the features somewhere on the Earth, in a particular place on the Earth, but each of those features is connected to a particular row in the attribute table. So each of the rows in this attribute table is associated with a feature on the map for that particular layer. So in this case, we're in the town boundary layer. Each one of these, as you can see, has a town name, and each one of them is linked to that town. They're not just two separate things. So I'm just going to, a little hard to see because I made it, there we go. So as you can see, I just highlighted in the attribute table, I highlighted the town of Eden, and on our map, it's now highlighted just to show that is a live link. They're not two separate files that have nothing to do with each other. We're not close enough to, and other little features that when you're working with the attribute data in the attribute table, there are some tools up here that allow us to, again, interact with the map. So by choosing Elmore and then choosing zoom map to the selected row, that is another way to interact and see the connection between these. Let's see. If we can select a bunch of towns interactively within the attribute table by just holding down the shift key and clicking all the way to the left, not in the attribute table itself, but the numbers associated with each feature over on the left of the table. Any ones that we've highlighted, we're going to be able to see highlighted on the map. Let's go ahead and interact now with the parcel data. We'll zoom to that layer. So we can select features on the map as well as select, oops, let's clear that first. We've got a bunch of things selected. We want to unselect those. We can start fresh. So not only can you select things, choose things when you're interacting with the attribute table and have it show up on the map, you can obviously go the other way where we can select things on the map using the selection tool, and that will be highlighted in the attribute table. And there are some reasons that that can be really helpful. So first of all, I just want to point out there's a few different ways to select features on the map. You can, if you choose the first one, that's basically a point selection where you're clicking a simple left click somewhere on the map, and whatever feature of the highlighted data layer is under that point will get highlighted, will get selected. But we also have the option to select features by polygon, by freehand, or by radius. So by polygon means I'm going to left click to create the vertices of a polygon. When I'm done, I'll right click, and any feature that intersects with that polygon. So you notice that it selected a bunch of features of parcels that weren't entirely within the polygon but intersected with that line that I drew, and obviously everything that's inside it as well. Those will all be selected. We also have, let's clear those. We also have select by freehand, which just means that if I hold my left button down, I can kind of draw freehand. Does some weird stuff if you just zoom all over the place. And again, you're creating in this case, in my case, just now a slightly odd polygon, but anything that was part of that polygon that that is intersecting with any of the parcels that are intersecting with that polygon are going to be selected now. And then let's open up our attribute table. And just in case anybody's from Eden, I want to assure you that I did delete names out of this attribute table before we started the webinar. So this attribute table is actually interesting because it reflects not only the attributes that were associated with the parcel boundary data that I received from the mapping contractor. It also reflects, if we scoot over a little bit to the right, these are attributes that are actually part of the grand list, or the state grand list, the assessment data that towns turn into the state. So these are things like the value of the various parts and definitions of the parcel, the acres. It did originally have the names of the owners. There are also some attributes related to state programs, whether it is, this one right here is use value reduction. Where do we go? So use value reduction refers to the use value program. How much reduction is there in this case? This one right here is HS for house site. So how much was the value of that property reduced based on use value? So there's a lot of really useful information in this attribute table because the parcel data has been joined to the grand list data. So it doesn't just reflect the parcel IDs, but also some of the values and other pieces of information in the grand list. So here I've got a number of different things highlighted. It's a little hard for me to scan through the, well actually, let's go back and just click one. So if I were to just click on one parcel, and then I went into the attribute table, and I'd have to scan through the whole thing to find it. There it is. Or if I clicked on if I hold the control key down, I can click on multiple features and then open up the attribute table. So now these are scattered all over, and really what I want is to be able to quickly look at all three of these. And there's a button up here in the top of the attribute table that is Move Selection to Top. So then I can look at all three at the same time, which is much more convenient. Now, just to give a little tiny real life example, or close to real life, something that folks in the town office do all the time is look at a property and need to identify abutters. So let's say a particular property was going to do some kind of work that caused a permit process, and it needed to be reviewed in some way, or the public needed to, or the abutters needed to be notified that something was happening on this property. a fairly simple way for someone interacting with QGIS or any other GIS program to achieve that abutters list, to find those abutters and their names and addresses, would be to select the parcel in question and then actually perform a little bit of analysis in order to also select the parcels that touch that one. So the way that we can achieve that is by going into the vector menu, choosing Research Tools, and then choosing Select by Location. And again, these step-by-step instructions are actually located in that PDF document that I referred to you to. That particular example doesn't use parcel data, but it does the same thing using the town boundary data. So what we want to do is select features found in the parcel layer, not the town boundaries, that intersect with the parcel layer, but specifically with the selected features in the parcel layer. Okay, so even though we're saying we want features in this one that intersect with the same one, the reason we're doing that is we want to identify additional features that intersect with these selected features. And there we go. And again, now we can go right into the attribute table, move all of those selected parcels up to the top, and we can actually select them for copying and exporting. Oh, to hunt a little bit for this one, sorry. There we go. So there's a little symbol that's, and one of the nice things about this, which maybe this is true of all software these days, but going over the various icons, if you go slowly enough and hover a bit, you'll see a little description. So copy selected rows to clipboard. I would like to do that. And then I'm just going to pop over to an Excel spreadsheet and paste those right in here. So if I actually did still have the name, I think we do have the addresses, but if I did still have the names and addresses of the owners in this spreadsheet, I would now have all the abutters plus the owner actually of the original property, which maybe I would screen out. And I could easily use this to create a mailing list to send a little notification to all of those abutters. So quick parcel abutter example of where just a little bit of analysis can help you automate a procedure a bit. Okay, so again, whenever we select things, if we're just sort of selecting and checking stuff out, you can always deselect both on the map interface here, and then also in the attribute table interface, there is right here, unselect all. So you can do it in either place. And remember, if anyone has any questions, look for the question panel within your big panel. You'll see the word questions, and if you click on the little plus sign next to that, you'll open it up and you'll be able to type your question in there. I noticed somebody, I think, has clicked on the hand raising thing, which is great, except I don't know exactly what your question is unless you type it. Okay. So that was the simple intro. We're going to do slightly more interesting examples now. I'm going to open up an existing, so again, if you're new to all of this, what we just did was blank slate, opened up the software, started a brand new project, which I have not named yet. So if this was a project that I wanted to save, I would go over to project, save or save as, and then save it as a project. And that project would contain references to the data that I used. It would remember where I got this data. It would remember everything I've done in the sense that how zoomed in I am right now, what color I changed the different layers to, the symbology. I don't think I've done much of anything else that it would remember, but it would, if I opened it up again, it would look exactly like this. But I'm not going to save it. Instead, I'm going to discard it and go ahead and open up an existing project. So as you can see, this has a number of different data layers, although if you look at the list of data layers over here on the left, it's a little bit more than what we see on the right, and you'll see in a second why that is. We have this set to oh, all right, I'll answer that question a little bit later. So we're going to see some of the other data layers show up as we zoom in. They are set to be to only show up at certain zoom levels. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that this very first layer listed, water WBD8 VT poly, is highlighted. So that's the selected layer, or the active layer. And what that means is that the software then knows if I do something like an identify, it knows what layer I'm interested in. So I just clicked on the identify features icon, turn my cursor into an identify tool. You'll notice that this little window popped up over on the left. It's where my results are going to show up once I click on the map. So I click here and I see what my results are over here on the right. And what I see is that this is the Winooski River watershed and a bunch of other very interesting information about the watershed listed there. If I were to happen to click on the edge of two watersheds where the software really couldn't tell which I was clicking on, both of them would actually show up over here, although it's not that obvious. So one is opened up, the Rivière Saint-François is, its information is shown here, all of its attribute data. Actually, I didn't say that earlier. This is showing us the attribute data for that one feature. In this case, because it's not sure which feature we really want, it's got a second one listed just below. If we click on the plus sign, you'll see that it's the same attribute information, but for a different feature. So in this case, the Lamoille River watershed. So that's just a good thing to know, that when you click on it and it looks like two are highlighted, but you're only seeing one over here, it is actually showing, it's just collapsed. We can also make the town boundaries the active layer. And then if I click in the same spot, instead of showing me results for the watershed, we see it for some towns, Middlesex and Moortown. And if I was a little bit more careful, I could probably get one town. Oh, no, maybe not. That's interesting. I think I would have to zoom in a bit more to be specific. There. So your ability to be precise is obviously affected by what zoom level you're at. Okay, so that's one way to kind of delve into our attributes a little bit. If we only really want to do so for one feature at a time and we want to interact with the map as our way of choosing the feature, we can just do a quick identify. All right, we're going to change our scale now. So down at the bottom, very bottom of the map, hopefully everyone can see that. We can change the scale either using some of the presets that are listed here. We can just click on one. Or if we have a particular scale in mind, oops, as I do, I'm going to type in 400,000. Have enough zeros there. And I picked that specifically because of some of the zoom level, zoom levels that some of the layers are set to show at. So some are only going to show once I'm below or around 400,000, below 500,000. So now we are starting to see not only the town boundaries, but also roads, some more surface waters, some black dots that, according to my layer list over here, are tourism rec sites boating points. So they are actually a subset of a rec sites data layer, meaning recreation sites, that was created by Agency of Natural Resources a number of years ago. This is a subset of those features, only including the boating points, and we'll look at that a little bit more to see what those boating points are. So we've changed the scale. We're looking at boating sites. So let's do our identify on some of these layers, like the boating points. It's also if you're sort of just exploring your data, it's a good way to start getting a sense of what the attributes are in there and actually seeing the values for some specific features. So you can see that this data layer has a lot of attributes. And I always point out to people in my class that it's sort of an interesting example of a particular decision that was made about how to structure this data. So what they decided was to include every single possible type of recreation site essentially as an attribute. So beyond things like the contact information and the address, if we go down, you'll see that most of these are some type of recreational use of a space. Archery, boating, hiking, mountain biking, skiing. Now, if you think about it, they could have chosen to have just one or maybe two or three attributes, and each one could have had a series of codes to indicate which recreational activity happened at that site. And if you think about why one would go with one particular way of structuring the data as opposed to another, I think the reason they chose this structure, which is a little bit unwieldy, and as you can see has a lot of null values, some blank, there's actually a fair number of blanks and zeros and nulls. The reason they went with this one was to allow the greatest flexibility in terms of indicating what recreational activities happen at any particular site. They knew that any particular site could have who knows how many different things happening at it, and they wanted to be able to indicate that. So it was a particular way of choosing to structure it that may or may not follow good database design, but there were some reasons behind it that I think are sort of interesting. So we can also do identify on the roads. Let's see what we can learn about those. So again, my precision is, I think that was my issue there. Yeah. Where you click matters in terms of what's highlighted and what's showing over in the identify results. So here we're clicking on Route 100. Over here we've got Vermont 73. That's the interstate. So I haven't made a big effort on fancy symbology for these roads, but you can see that, or labeling actually, because they're not the focus of this particular map, but they are there and we can identify them if we need to. And then the final thing I want to do some identify on is all these green blobs, green polygons around. Many of you probably know what they are, but for anybody that's not familiar, we could start clicking on those and see what we see. So luckily it has a name. Well, it's a little truncated here. So this happens to be the White River Wildlife Management Area. This right here, I almost always choose this one at some point, the Podunk Wildlife Management Area. And you can see that there's a bunch of information, some of which is null, on each of these polygons. Ainsworth State Park. So this data layer, as you can see over on the left, is the Cadastral Cons Pub polygons layer, and this is the conserved land and specifically the publicly conserved land. This particular map we're looking at is, the data is pretty old. It's from 2009. We're actually in the process right now of working with our data partners to update this information. You'll all be, or some of you at least will be excited to hear that. Hoping that sometime in 2016, hopefully early in 2016, we will actually have updated information for this data layer. All right, so that's identify. I don't think there's anything else fascinating to say about identify right now. All right, so once again, we'll just try the select features tool now that we have some more interesting data layers. So I'm going to go ahead and do the boating points, make the boating points the active layer, and then I'm going to go up to my select features, do select by polygon, and just start creating a polygon. So when I think about how this sort of selection could be useful, I think, you know, if I was looking at this and wanting to know what boating points were within a reasonable distance of the town I live in or a town I'm going to be visiting, or some other feature, and I just want to casually select an area and see what turns up and what they're called. I can do that. You should be able to see that they've turned yellow, all of the boating points that were within that temporary polygon that I drew. And once again, we can go into the attribute table, click on Move Selection to Top, and then pretty easily find the names of all of those boating points, access points for putting a boat in the water. We actually also in this, I think for some of them at least, will have some contact information, some phone number for two of them. And again, if whatever I was doing, if I needed the addresses or needed to save this information separately, I can easily copy this to the clipboard and then paste it into a Word document or a spreadsheet, wherever I want, which is pretty convenient. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and undo all that. All right, so that's the simple kind of directly interactive way to select and identify and kind of get information about your features. We are now going to we're going to select our features using an expression in the attribute table. So I'm going to open up Water DLG Lake Poly. So this is the layer that is showing us lakes and ponds. I go into the attribute table. And I'm going to click on this icon, which you can see is the Select Features Using an Expression icon. Pops open this window where we can now build an expression. Oh, it's slightly oriented differently than last time I used it. So you can see that our expression is going to be built in here. Now I could just type everything in by hand, but there would be a fairly high chance that I would mess that up. So I am instead going to open up some of my functions over here, and you'll see that one of them is fields and values. So this gives us our attribute fields. And I'm going to use that to start off by saying name. So I'm going to double click to get that to show up in my expression builder. Equal to, and I just have to single click on the operators. So there's equal, name equal to, and I can, because I have name highlighted here, I can click on load values over in this window. And again, this way I don't have to type in the name and make, excuse me, make a simple mistake like not doing all uppercase letters, which would be an easy thing to do. And when you're doing an equal to, you have to do it exactly right. What am I looking for? Sorry, Lake Dunmore. Let's find Lake Dunmore. So let's say you were told Lake Dunmore was the place to go. So again, this is a double click, and you weren't sure where it was. And so you want to interact with this to go ahead and find it. So name equals Lake Dunmore, click on where's my I think it's worked. It just doesn't really give me any. Yeah, sorry. I forgot. I even have it written in my directions that it may look like nothing has happened. If you can see it there, we're going to actually zoom into it. No? Oh, I think maybe I have to do that in here. So let's go, now that we've selected it, let's go back to our attribute table and make sure that everything confirms. So there's our one selected feature. If we scroll over a little bit, we can see that indeed it's Lake Dunmore, and then we can click on the zoom map to selected rows. Okay. So we'll close this because we're done with this. So basically we just used that, that window to create an expression that looked at the attributes, the values and the attributes in order to select something. So here we've got a lake selected, and it happens to be Lake Dunmore. And one of the things, so I'm just going to keep doing, sort of demonstrating a few other little analysis things by just continuing on with this Lake Dunmore selection. So now that we have a feature selected, we can actually do something called creating a buffer. And then we're going to use that buffer to select something else. So let's create a buffer by clicking on, again, the vector menu. This time we're going to go into geoprocessing tools and choose buffer. So our input vector layer is going to be the layer that has this highlighted feature, which in this case is water underscore DLG lake poly. There's our input vector layer. Use only selected features, that's correct. Segments to approximate, I have to admit I've never really figured out what that means, so I'm not going to change that. Buffer distance. Now this is where it is important to know that by default, the units that this is going to measure in are the units of your data layer. So because we're using Vermont State Plane meters data, these units are going to be meters. So I am going to set it to 200 meters. So we're going to create a buffer of 200 meters beyond the edge of Lake Dunmore. And this is actually going to create a shapefile. So I'm going to put my shapefile here. Add result to canvas, sure. So that's just going to, I won't have to go through that extra step of finding that again and adding it. I'll just go ahead and have it added automatically. And there it is. So you'll notice, and I'm just going to change the order here and put the buffer under DLG Lake so that you can see that what happened was it actually created a shapefile, a feature that includes the lake and goes 200 meters beyond that. Rather than only creating that buffer, it's actually creating kind of the lake plus the buffer over again. And you can see that when it's got the lake on top of it. If it's on top of the lake, it entirely covers it, if it's drawn on top of the lake. All right, so there's our 200 meter buffer. So the neat thing about that buffer is that we can now use that to select some features. So we're going to go back to our vector menu, choose research tools, and select by location. So this is the same thing that we did with the parcel data. We're going to select features in. So this is where we set the data layer that we want to find some features in. And so in this case, I'm going to do the boating points that intersect features in our buffer layer, Lake Dunmore buffer. And notice that we have to choose carefully amongst these, include input features that intersect the selection features, or include input features that touch the selection features, include input features that overlap. So it's important to pick the correct one, or include input features completely within the selection feature. So for instance, if we were trying to pick, I don't know, a town, we would find that it would not highlight any of these towns that are right here because none of them are completely within if we had chosen the include input features completely within. All right, so include input features that intersect the selection features. And once again, nothing seems to have happened, but the way that we check to see whether anything has happened. So remember, we were trying to select features in the boat sites. Oops. Okay. And so we're going to go to the boat sites attribute table. And again, right off the top, we can't really see whether anything's highlighted, but if we click on move selection to top, we can see that we do have two things highlighted, two features chosen, and coincidentally enough, one of them is called Lake Dunmore Fish and Wildlife Access, and one is called Lake Dunmore Campersville, so that even makes sense. Now visually on our map, we're not really seeing them because our buffer is actually blocking them. So if you look up here, you'll see a little boating site that's highlighted, and you'll see one here that's almost tucked under the lake there. All right, so we just did a few different steps to get to a selection of some boating sites that are adjacent to Lake Dunmore. Okay. And now, all right, and the final thing I'm going to demonstrate is selecting features using an attribute query. And this is building a more complex query. So I think I'm actually going to unselect this. All right, and we're going to make now Lake Champlain the active layer. So another way to do a query, so this is the active layer, and then we go up to the layer menu and we choose query. All right, and you'll notice that because we had made that the active layer, it knows that it's doing its query on the Lake Champlain water underscore Lake Champlain 100, which is a layer that was designed to be used at no closer than a 1 to 100,000 scale. And I am basically going to, using these few fields, I'm going to build what looks like a, well actually in our step-by-step directions it looks like a very complicated expression. It's not really that complicated, it's just because it's step-by-step. But let's see if I can do it without following the step-by-step. So I want to say island, so double click on island, equals, and then I'm going to see what the values in here are, yes and no. Island equals yes, and area is greater than, and here I'm going to type in a number. And keep in mind, I'm double clicking on fields, I'm single clicking on operators. My number here, I should put my glasses on, 2023500. And again, if you were doing this yourself from scratch, knowing your data, you would know what your units are, because they just are whatever they are in this attribute, and you would know what number you want to put in there. We will talk about what this is in just a second. And area is less than 2428200. 2428200. Okay, so we've just created an expression that uses multiple, rather than just searching for a particular value in a particular attribute, we're creating a slightly more complicated expression that uses a number of different attributes and their values. So we want island, the value to be yes. We want the area of this island to be between 20,235,000 square meters, I believe, and 24,282,000 square meters. So that's we're looking for an island of a particular size. And if we go into, so the other thing that did, that was the other difference with what we just did was that was not simply a selection function where you end up with a highlighted feature within the data layer. That was actually a definition query. I should have said that at the beginning, because what that did was Now within our Lake Champlain data layer, the only portion of that data layer that's showing visually and that's showing in our attribute table is the feature that meets the criteria that we just set. So here it is. So if I highlight it now and zoom to it, you can see that it, and I can unhighlight it just so it's, although maybe I want it, yeah, maybe I want it to be highlighted so it's easier to see. So, so here is a portion of the Lake Champlain data layer, which ironically enough is an island because this particular layer includes islands as part of the data layer. As you can see, you actually have to filter them out if you don't want them to be covered with water. So there is, as it turns out, if we, since our water data layer does not actually tell us what that is, we're going to use the town boundaries layer to figure it out. I'm going to do a little identify. And what we find is this is Isle La Motte. So our quick analysis allowed us to identify an island with a particular size, and it is in fact Isle La Motte. All right. All right, that is the fairly basic introduction to analysis and kind of becoming a little more familiar with your attribute data that I have got in store for today. So if anybody has questions, you should feel free to send them in now. Let's see. The one other thing I was going to perhaps do while you guys are thinking about whether you have questions is go back to our website and just point out that one of the things that that you always need to be aware of and check into when you're working with data is the metadata, the information about the data, because that is where you're going to get a lot of the information about your attributes. And you notice that in some of the data layers, the attributes can be a little bit cryptic. Sometimes you have codes rather than easily intelligible values. Sometimes the attributes themselves are named cryptically. Newer data, that's less true than older data, but still you often bump up against that. So for instance, if I were to go into our data warehouse, the open data warehouse, and search for that conspub data, all the data that we have has metadata of one sort or another, or it's all of the same sort. I should say it's of somewhat varying levels of quality, but we do strive to have full metadata for all of the data layers. So for this conspub layer, the way you get at the metadata is to click on the More Info button. You'll get this little quick metadata light information initially that just gives you stuff that you might just want to know really immediately. You know, the age, is it statewide or not? Is it polygons, points, or lines? The next thing you might want to look at is actually the full metadata. And it's a little bit hard to look at, but remember that there's always some kind of a description or abstract up at the top, which is a really good thing to look at. And then if we scroll down a little ways, we can get into the entity and attribute section. I'm just going to scroll for a minute, and once we get there, I'll stop. Okay, entity and attribute information. And once you train yourself how to look at this with all of these tabs, you'll see that the names of the attributes are the first thing listed after each new attribute is kind of identified by the word attribute. So for instance, there were some codes in that conspub data when we did the identify, like PP type, primary protection type. And this actually explains what those codes mean. So if we look down here, you'll see 01 means fee ownership, 02 means this. Keep going, you've got lots more. 10.3 means it's a Green Mountain Club conservation easement. So knowing that the metadata is here and that it has these values and explanations is really important when you come across information like this within your attribute table that's not obvious, a little bit more cryptic. Okay, I think that I do not see any questions. I'll wait another minute or two just in case, but hopefully it's because this was all clear enough. If people felt like this was a little bit too basic, I'll welcome that feedback. Oh shoot, I'm not sure if I set up the feedback survey, to be honest. If you don't encounter a feedback survey when we end the webinar, I encourage you to send me an email. You will get a follow-up email tomorrow, I think, and you can respond to that, or you can just send me an email today. But I'd welcome your feedback. Oh, that's not what I wanted. My contact information is right on the front page. That right there's a link to my email of our website. If there are other topics that you're interested in seeing in our webinar series, or specifically to do with QGIS, I'd be happy to hear about that as well. My knowledge level is pretty basic, but I can work on it, and I can find other people also, because I do know some other QGIS users in the state who are often willing to do webinars. So feel free to request what you're looking for. All right, since I'm not seeing any questions, I might let you all go a little bit early. And remember that if you or somebody else that you know might be interested in seeing the recorded version of the webinar, it will be posted at our YouTube page, and also in the event archive, or the event archive will link to the YouTube page, but it'll be posted at the YouTube page within a few days, either tomorrow or Monday. So I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and participating, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks, and have a good day.